Welcome to the Daily Faceoff Show, your everyday source for the latest news with top-notch insight and analysis. Live every weekday at noon Eastern.
It's the final countdown. If I could sing, that's at least the song I would sing. We are 3 days before the NHL trade deadline. It is a Friday, March 18th edition of the Daily Faceoff Show. We're streaming live on dailyfaceoff.com as well as Twitter and YouTube. He is former Vancouver Canucks assistant general manager Chris Giroux. Chris, how you holding up?
Doing well. Starting to get excited. We're down to the final crunch here, so it's going to be exciting.
Yeah, this is your first deadline on the dark side of the media. You've been at the table in the war room, and we'll touch on that a little bit later in the show, your experiences there. You had a great piece on dailyfaceoff.com earlier this week explaining what it's like, both from a food perspective, which is super important to me with all the nervous eating that goes on deadline day, as well as what it's like to be there in the last hour as the guy responsible for hitting the button. Sending to NHL Central Registry that a trade is in order. We'll dive into that, but first let's throw 2 minutes and 30 seconds up on the clock, and let's start with the Philadelphia Flyers and Claude Giroux. A pretty magical night in South Philadelphia on Thursday, because it wasn't just a celebration of 1,000 games as Claude Giroux, the longest-serving captain in Flyers history, becomes just the second player in the franchise's history to play 1,000 games all in that team's uniform. Bob Clarke, you see him there, is the other. But it was also a moment to say goodbye, that Claude Giroux and everyone in the arena knew that this would be his last game with the team. You see the team photo. That was about the only time Claude Giroux looked comfortable on Thursday evening. This curtain call that he received from fans at the end was really quite a special moment for a guy that gave his all to the franchise. One of the best players in the NHL over the last decade, plus fourth in points since 2010, behind only Patrick Kane, Sidney Crosby, and Alex Ovechkin. That is elite company. That's why Chris Giroux, he is the number one player on our trade targets board that's now up on dailyfaceoff.com. And that's why he's a pretty sought-after commodity from two teams in the Florida Panthers and the Colorado Avalanche. This is a two-horse race between two Stanley Cup heavyweights that are slugging it out to get Claude Giroux at the deadline. What would they be getting, and what would this be like knowing in a front office that there's only one other team that could potentially land the Flyers captain?
Yeah, you're obviously getting a great player and a great leader. The crazy thing about both Colorado and Florida is they really don't have the draft prospects to go out and get a guy like this. Florida's already given up its first round pick in this year's and next year's draft. Colorado has given up next year's, and they've already given up their second round pick in both years. So, they're going to have to do it with prospects and other picks combinations. But yeah, obviously a guy that any team would benefit having on the roster. The one I have a couple of questions though with Giroux and his mindset. He just played 1,000 games with one team. The emotions and everything that would have been going through his mind, he's got to pick up and go to a new team where he's not going to be the big dog. He's not going to be the captain. The adjustment period that he's going to face, I think, is going to be pretty significant for him. And obviously a true pro, I'm sure he can do it, but I wouldn't count on a really smooth transition, because I think it's going to take him a little bit of time to wrap his mind around, hey, I just left an organization where I was the man and I played 1,000 games, and now going to a new surroundings. Also, imagine if his 1,000th game had been Tuesday or Wednesday, the decision the Flyers would have had to make. That stuff's important to guys. So if they'd had to move him at $9.99, I don't want to know the fallout from that.
Yeah, the numerology there really kind of worked out amazingly. Exactly 1,000 games, exactly 900 points. Second to Bob Clarke all-time in games played, points, and assists in franchise history. I think I kind of look at it on the opposite side from you in terms of Claude Giroux and his impact and fit, only in the sense that he's had a long time to kind of process this at this point. Everyone has known for months kind of where this is trending as the Flyers season swirled down the drain. I think it's been a little bit tough for him to accept because he wants to win so badly and wanted to do it in Philly. But I think the other part that may be really freeing for him is that he's had to wear a lot of this. The burden has been on him for the last decade plus to be the guy that gets the Flyers over the hump, to have the letter on his jersey and all the focus and pressure, to the point where he could step into a new place. And while there would be expectations based on the price paid, he's just one of the guys. He's not expected to come in and carry everything and shoulder that load for the team. I think my big question is, if you're the Colorado Avalanche and you've jockeyed to be in this spot with your cap space and your picks and prospects to be able to make this transaction, or if you're Florida and you end up falling short and you've lined yourself up for this, what's the check down option when you look at the trade targets board, Chris? Who gets you excited in terms of being the next best forward that's available at this deadline? Because I think, certainly from a rental perspective, there's a big drop off.
Yeah, I think you're right there. So obviously the team that gets Giroux has won the big prize, and that's why the price is likely to stay pretty high here today and through the weekend. Raquel in Anaheim is obviously a guy that can put up points. He's not at the level of Giroux, but he's a guy that can score and add to your secondary scoring. You put Tyler Bertuzzi's name on the list recently. I think that's a really interesting name. Max Domi is a guy that's not too far removed from putting up points and has had a pretty good year this year. And then if Vancouver decides to move either of their guys, Miller or Besser, obviously those are guys that can score. So, I think there's still a lot of good names on the list, and whichever team fails on Giroux, we'll still have a lot of good targets to go after.
Yeah, here's my read on where the Flyers are at the moment. He's obviously he didn't accompany the team to Ottawa, will not be playing against the Senators on Friday night, will not face the New York Islanders on Sunday at home if he's not traded by then. They're purely holding him out to this point for asset protection. And I think they've been in a little bit of an uncomfortable position as a team because Giroux holds the full no move clause and he can veto any trade. And so while he has probably presented these two teams to which he'd accept a trade, I believe ultimately his preference, if all else is equal, is to go to Florida. And that puts the Flyers in a tough spot to then extract value and find leverage from the Florida Panthers if they have any inkling, and I think the Panthers might, that's the one team that's the preferred destination. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, even if it is Colorado and Giroux has a last-second change of heart and they've presented the best deal, he can just say, I'm not going there, and refuse to sign the document that will allow the trade to go through. So the Flyers are in an awkward position. And my question to you, if you're sitting in this front office in Florida and you're competing maybe against Colorado to step up and get the deal done, you don't have your first round pick next year or the year after, or I should say this year or the year after. Your next one is in 2024. We've heard some prospects that have been mentioned. Owen Tippett, of course, sat out Thursday's game in the AHL. Mackie Samoskevich, their first-round pick from last year, a forward at Michigan, has also been rumored to be included. Is that enough to get the deal done? And what length do you go to when you're backed into this position, if you're the Flyers, in order to make this work, given sort of the dynamic that's played out in front of everyone for all to see?
Yeah. Well, at the end of the day, you're going to lose Giroux anyway. So from the Flyers' perspective, I think, getting a guy like Tippett in return would be huge, right? He's proven that he can play at the NHL level. He's dominating at the AHL level. And if you're Florida, it's tough to give up a guy like Tippett, but when you don't have your picks, I think that's the decision you need to make. I mean, they're obviously all in. Florida, Colorado, they've demonstrated earlier this week, both of them shoring up their defense with Sherratt and Manson deals. They're not going to stop now. I said 1 week ago on this show that if I was Florida, I wouldn't necessarily mess with the forward group because they've been, so dominant this year. They're leading the league in goals and may score the most goals of any team in the salary cap era. And yet, when you have a chance to add a guy like Giroux, you have to think about it. Will they mortgage their future a little bit given the absence of draft capital and if Tippett goes too? Yeah, but the big prize of a Stanley Cup may just be worth it. So they're that close. And if I'm in that Florida boardroom, I'm thinking, hey, one more piece could put us over the edge.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, I'm with you. They already went out and swung big on Ben Sherratt, trading the first round pick plus to get Sherratt out of the Montreal Canadiens earlier this week. We'll see what GM Bill Zito has left in him if Joe Sakic steps up from the Colorado Avalanche. That brings us to the number 2 player on our trade targets board. As I mentioned, the top 50 up on dailyfaceoff.com, and that's Hampus Lindholm from the Anaheim Ducks. So here's where things stand with Lindholm at the moment. The Ducks circled back to the Lindholm camp in the last 24 hours. I think there was a last push, a last check-in to say, hey, is there any chance that we could get this done? I don't believe the Anaheim Ducks were willing to go beyond a 5-year deal for Hampus Lindholm. I think his AAV was, maybe starting with a 7, high 6s in that range. That's for sure. And it's just not a term that the Lindholm camp is comfortable with. They're thinking that they can get a 7 or, depending on where he's traded, an 8-year deal. And that's a spot where you look at the difference between total dollars. It's a big difference that Hampus Lindholm would potentially be leaving on the table for years 6, 7, and 8 potentially. So this is the premier defenseman that's available on the market. An elite skater, a minute chewer, a guy that would be a big addition to any playoff team. And now the Ducks are in trade mode. The ask is a first-round pick plus a grade A prospect plus another piece to make the finances work, with the Ducks willing to retain half. So, Chris, my question to you is, when you're gaming this out and you're looking at it from the Lindholm camp's perspective, is this a no-brainer in that you think you're pretty comfortable in being able to get at least a 7-year deal that would put another $12 to $15 million in your player's pocket?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I can see from Anaheim's standpoint why they wouldn't want to go too long on the term and too big on the money. They've got some young stars that they're going to have to pay, Troy Terry, Zegras. So, and Hampus doesn't put up big points, right? He logs big minutes and he's a solid defender, but he's not a points guy. So, I can see why they'd be a little bit tentative and why maybe they haven't been able to reach a deal there. If you're Lindholm and you think that there's a team out there that's willing to do the 7 or 8 year term at that kind of money, it's a no brainer for him. Are there teams willing to do that? I'm sure there are, right? There's just so few of those type of defensemen in the league that some team that maybe doesn't have the young progression that the Ducks have will be willing to shell out that kind of dough. So, it's a tricky situation for Anaheim, but if he does move, then that's probably the reason why.
It only takes one, as you said, in order to step up and pay. And I think the other part of that is probably a bit of what the Ducks have been asking themselves of late, which is, if we are trading this guy, how do we make our team better next year? How do you find a Hampus Lindholm on the market? It's really hard to do. You generally have to develop from within. And that leaves the Ducks in this awkward spot where they've taken such a big step forward this year, where they'd have to take a step back potentially next year, already trading Manson. Raquel could be on the way out, as we've already talked about. That's a lot to lose from one team, and certainly leaves the Ducks players, at least, probably with some question marks, saying, where are we heading? How can we be competitive quickly? Certainly something to monitor. We'll see Hampus Lindholm going to heat up in the next 72 hours. That is for certain. So, Chris, as I teased off the top of the show, you have a couple pieces that ran on dailyfaceoff.com this week talking about your experience being inside the Vancouver Canucks war room. You were tasked, you were the guy that was ready, sitting there with an email open, maybe a couple emails open, a couple different drafts, ready to push the send button to get it to NHL's Central Registry by 2:59 with 59 seconds Eastern time. Give us your reaction, your experience. Tell us a story about what it's like being inside the war room. What's the mood like? What's it like being part of a team on deadline day?
Yeah, it's a tense day. It's a long day. On the West Coast, you get in at 4:35 in the morning because the Eastern teams are already at work. It's a lot of hurry up and wait. You make a call to another team, they're thinking about it, and then you maybe call another team, but you're waiting for a response, you're waiting for a counter offer, you're waiting for something. And I kind of half jokingly did the article about the tremendous amount of food that gets eaten. It's that nervous energy. There's your scouts have flown in from out of town. All your analytics guys are around the table. Everybody's there waiting for something to happen, and all you have to do is eat, right? So a tremendous amount of food gets consumed. But yeah, those last minutes can be crazy. I remember I think it might have been even the last deadline. We were moving a guy, and there were a number of teams interested, but none of them really made, that final offer that worked until literally 2-3 minutes to go before the deadline. And I knew that we were going to move him. It's just a matter of which team and which piece in return. So I had a couple of emails drafted on my system, and as soon as it got done, I was able to hit send. The last thing I wanted was, me typing it as the deadline expired. So I had to have it pre-cooked and ready to roll.
Yeah, you mentioned some nervous energy, some nervous eating, also some nervous fingers there if you're the guy responsible for that. One of the interesting things that I thought you pointed out in the story was just that the general manager always seems to be off in another room for a good chunk of the day just because he's making and taking calls, and he's in his office. Probably you guys are in a boardroom, and there's essentially a runner that's coming back and forth delivering information. You guys have the different deadline shows from the major networks, and this year Daily Faceoff up on the screen. But what is the info sharing process like in terms of how much are you hearing that's outside of what you're seeing on TV? Is there a lot of communication? Are you hearing a lot of chatter from around the league? What's that like?
Yeah, I mean, usually on that day, the GM isn't only talking to the other GMs that he's maybe working on a deal with. He'd also be talking to agents. He'd be talking to, some media members even, and just trying to get a sense of what's playing out and what everybody's hearing so that you're kept up to date with the information. And in the bigger boardroom, you've got, the team working on repopulating spreadsheets or grids with draft picks that may have moved or rosters that have changed, the cap implications of that, just so that you're operating in real time with all the correct info when you're speaking with a team. You know what their roster looks like, what their current up-to-date cap is, what their draft picks are, so that you can feed that to the GM and he's got the relevant information when he's trying to make a deal. So it's it can be pretty hairy, but again, a lot of waiting because most of the work has been done leading up to it, right? You're not doing new work on deadline day. You're updating things in real time, but the work's been done, the preparation's been done, and a lot of waiting around, hoping that the right thing comes through.
Well, it feels like this year in particular, Chris, is going to be one that comes right down to the wire. I know a lot of managers that I've spoken to in the last few days, they're interested in a lot of pieces that are on the market, but they feel like the prices have been so high. So it's that sort of, game of chicken moment that usually I think starts to play out 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock Eastern on Monday, where teams, if they're not getting what they're looking for, the price begins to drop. We'll see how quickly, how much waits exactly until 3 o'clock before teams start to pile up the queue. We saw 16 deadline deal trades last year. I predicted earlier on our rundown podcast that I don't know, just pulled a number out of thin air. 23, why not? I think a lot of it's going to come down to Monday specifically. Maybe not a Claude Giroux trade, for instance, but I think a lot of it will. Let's dive deeper into the trade targets list. Let's talk about some of the other guys that made the top 50 with our trade targets talk delivered by DoorDash.
So, Frank, you've got a new edition of the trade targets out. The top 50 is being published today. You're like Santa. You made your list. You're checking it twice, telling us who's going to be naughty and nice. So let's look at Detroit. They've got a couple of guys, Nick Leddy and Tyler Bertuzzi, that have kind of shot up your list. Do you think they're ready to make a move on those guys?
Yeah, I think the best way to describe the Detroit Red Wings is open for business. They're, I think, ready to do just about anything that Steve Yzerman thinks will make their team better. And I think there's been a lot of conversation that's percolated in the last 48 to 72 hours about Tyler Bertuzzi, where a number of teams like, can we really pry this guy loose? And I think the answer is yes. He's had an unbelievable season, 24 goals, 24 assists for 48 points in just 50 games. He's also missed 9 games because he hasn't been able to play in Canada and cross the border because he is one of 2 active NHL players that is unvaccinated to this point. And so when you look at Bertuzzi and the season he's had, he has 1 more year left on his deal next year at $4.75 million, and is someone that talking to teams, they say this guy, it's a compliment. He's incredibly annoying to play against. And not only that, he's a lesser skilled version of Brad Marchand. So I thought that was a perfect way to describe him. A perfect playoff piece for a contending team. And not only that, but you'd be able to keep him. So high value in Tyler Bertuzzi. I think the Red Wings are open to discussing it. I think Bertuzzi is open to a trade. I think that's the proper way to frame it. A couple other guys that we had on our list from Detroit. Leddy, he already sat out against Vancouver on Thursday night. I think the Red Wings are looking for something in the second round pick range for Nick Leddy, and they'll get it. I think he's a guy that has lots of playoff experience between the Islanders and the Chicago Blackhawks, 4 trips to the conference final or beyond for Nick Leddy in his career. Philip Zadina, a little bit maybe less likely. Feels like that could be an offseason trade, but his name has certainly been out there. And I wanted to touch very quickly on one guy who did not end up making our trade targets board, and that would be Mark Stahl. I have seen his name out there. He holds a full no move clause. I believe his preference, Chris, is to stay in Detroit. He really likes it there. It would have to take something from one of the true contending teams, you know, the Tampas, the Colorados, the Floridas that would have to step up. And it's also dependent on role as well. Not someone interested in going to play a 7th role and sitting out as a healthy scratch as an insurance piece. So less likely to move for Mark Stahl, but I wouldn't say never.
Okay, let's change our focus to the New Jersey Devils. Here's a team with 3 names that have all been linked to potential trades that are all under team control as RFAs. Damon Severson, Mackenzie Blackwood, and Pavel Zacha. What do you think the Devils are thinking with those 3?
Pretty similar vein to the Detroit Red Wings in that I think Tom Fitzgerald has a lot of different balls in the air. I think there's been some interest in Severson that they might have to consider ultimately if teams check down to a guy like him from the rental market, or they look at the prices on the rental market and say, why would I trade that for this guy when I can trade maybe just a little bit more and get Damon Severson for an additional year at $4.2 million? And they're on the search or on the prowl for a goaltender. You know, Mackenzie Blackwood, you see his name on the list. He's been hurt. There's been lots of question marks about his game. How does he get his game back to the level that the Devils were expecting it to be at a couple years back? I think there's been some confidence lost mutually, both between the Devils in Mackenzie Blackwood and Mackenzie Blackwood in himself. And Pavel Zacha is another guy that's been out there. They've tried to essentially shoehorn him in as a winger. That guy's a center. He believes he's a center. He wants to play center. They're just a team that is actually blessed down the middle with their center position. And, Zacha just simply isn't going to get the minutes or the workload that he probably needs in order to be at his most productive. So I think Zacha has more value to other teams than he does the New Jersey Devils at this point, a pending RFA with Arbrights. The Devils, kind of leaning, Chris, which team is the biggest wild card in the Metro Division? It's the Devils or potentially the Columbus Blue Jackets. Max Domi, just outside our top 10 on our trade targets board. Both those teams are going to be fascinating to watch over the next 72 hours.
Yeah, I've always liked Zacha. I think if a team picks him up, they're getting an underrated piece that's still growing. So one final question for you, Frank. Is there a team out there that you think could surprise us with a move that maybe hasn't been talked about or that comes out of left field somewhere?
Yeah, I think there's a couple teams in the West that I'm keeping my eye on as potentially teams that take a big swing. One, and they're probably for 2 different reasons. One is the St. Louis Blues. They're in pure contender mode. I think they've considered and looked at a number of different options. I think they've been, they were hanging around in the Ben Sherratt sweepstakes. They certainly weren't willing to pay that price. I think they've been in and touched base on Jacob Chicker, and I think they've checked in on Hampus Lindholm. They're looking for a partner that can play with Colton Parayko on their top pair. They're looking for potentially some help at forward with someone that's versatile. They're a team that really had a lot of interest in Claude Giroux. They didn't make the final cut, but it just goes to show you that they're interested in adding a piece of that potential magnitude. And the other part of the St. Louis Blues is what's really complicating things is their dollars in, dollars out, their salary cap picture. They're a team that would probably need to trade a piece off of their roster in order to make money work. You'd need retained salary. There's a lot of hoops to jump through, but I think the way Doug Armstrong views his team is that They have probably as good as any chance of anyone in the Western Conference. Minnesota Wild are in this category. The Calgary Flames are in this category of being able to knock off or go toe-to-toe with the Colorado Avalanche in a playoff series. If anyone, it could be the Blues. They'd like to gear up and help themselves as much as they can to boost their chances. The other team is the Los Angeles Kings. Different scenario, not quite in full contender mode, but I could see them going out to add a piece, particularly up front on the left side. I could see them adding on their back end as well, but they're looking probably not for rentals. They're not going to be paying high prices, but a team that would be interested in players with terms. So I think Rob Blake has been out there. You've heard the Kings linked to Jacob Chychrun for one. The Boston Bruins have been linked to Chychrun. The Bruins are another team that could make some big moves at the deadline. Lots of intrigue, lots of unknowns as we get to the deadline. Chris, that'll wrap up our trade target segment delivered by DoorDash. You see the promo codes at the bottom of your screen. DFODD if you're in Canada, DFODD US if you're in the United States. That gets you 25% off and free delivery on your first order. It's deadline weekend. You've got the NCAA tournament on, March Madness. You don't want to cook. All your favorites and more delivered right to your door by DoorDash. All right, Chris, it's time for our daily face-off inbox question of the day. Hashtag AskDFO. Hit us up on Twitter. We're taking your questions all the time. We'd be happy to answer them on the show. My question to you is Mark Giordano a fit for the Toronto Maple Leafs?
That's an interesting question. Obviously they're looking for some help on the blue line. They picked up Ilya Lyubushkin earlier at the beginning of the trade deadline. I think he's been okay, but I'm not sure he's necessarily the answer they're looking for. They may have found an answer in goal here with Källgren. So, can they free up enough room through retention and maybe a third-party broker to bring in Gio? Obviously still a talented player, a bit long in the tooth, but they only need him for the playoff run. And, with his leadership and his abilities, I think he's a guy that would help Toronto for sure.
Yeah, I think he's right at the top of the list for the Leafs. I think they're clearly interested in Hampus Lindholm as well. I don't think they're wild about the idea of paying a first-round pick for any rental. So the one player on that list, Lindholm, that's not going to happen. Someone will give up a first to get him. It's going to be Giordano that has the possibility to fall to a second-round pick. You try and game out the market. Who are some of the other teams that might be interested? Boston, I think, is one. Maybe St. Louis, another option for Giordano. The thing is, there's a lot of complicating factors here. There's not a ton of no trade protection for Giordano. He can't totally direct where he's going. But I think at the end of the day, the answer is the Seattle Kraken would like to do right by Mark Giordano. They'd like to send him to a place that he'd like to play. And I believe the team at the top of his list, he'd like to go home to play for the Toronto Maple Leafs, wear the blue and white and get another shot at some playoff success. And if all things are equal, if everyone is offering a second-round pick, well, then I don't doubt at all that at that point, the Kraken and Ron Francis would steer him to the place that he wants to go. The question for the Leafs, the question for the market is, will it ultimately come down to that second-round pick? And if it does, I could see him being a great fit. The previous chemistry that he had with TJ Brody, he's there. That's a possibility. Right. Lots of different ways to plug Mark Giordano into your lineup. Smart, efficient, doesn't take too many risks, even if he may have lost a little bit of a step. And that sort of gives you a nice, if you're the Leafs, acquisition window. You're not totally bypassing your future in terms of mortgaging that. To help your team to this point this season, you've got a daunting task in front of you with the teams that you might be facing in the playoffs. Tampa likely to start. Then if you win, potentially Florida. A lot to ask, and Giordano maybe is that nice middle ground in terms of an acquisition cost if it ends up indeed being a second-round pick. That's what they're hoping for ends up happening in terms of playing out the market. And you mentioned Källgren, what a great story he's been. I still think that they're keeping an eye on the prices for the goaltending market, particularly with Marc-Andre Fleury. So lots to keep an eye on over the next 72 hours.
Do you think Gio snuggled up in his Toronto Maple Leaf sheets the way that Tavares did? Like, be a perfect reunion for him, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I just can't see it. He probably had to throw all of his Calgary Flames ones out. So
Yeah.
maybe he did that when he moved to Seattle over the summer. Let's bring in Tyler Yaremchuk for our Daily Faceoff Daily Bet segment. Tyler, so much trade talk. It'd be kind of wild if you could bet on trades. Previously, it was like, will this guy be moved, yes or no? But I think you're looking at some more in terms of lines of games tonight. What do you got?
Yeah, if you could bet on where guys would be going, Frank, I think you would be banned from it because that would be considered insider
That would be
trading.
like quite literally insider trading. Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, last night we managed to get the split with my 2 picks, so the hockey went well, but I'm in the unfortunate group of people who had Kentucky winning it all in March Madness. So that's certainly depressing for me. Anyways, let's get into the picks for tonight, courtesy of our friends at PointsBet. And we're taking a couple puck lines tonight. So we're starting at the top here with the Colorado Avalanche. And honestly, I'm surprised that the puck line is paying out close to even money here for the Colorado Avalanche, considering they've had a couple of days off here. I get that they're still on the road, but I kind of like the spot they're in here, going up against the Sharks team that just played and just got shut out 3-0 last night at the hands of the LA Kings. It's a rested Avalanche team. They got Josh Manson, and they've covered the puck line in back-to-back games as well. So I love Colorado in this spot on the puck line. And for my second and actually final play here on a Friday night, I'm also taking the puck line in Calgary versus Buffalo. The Sabres did not look very good last night against the Edmonton Oilers. They really struggled to get much of anything going offensively. And I mean, that's an Edmonton team that's nowhere nearly as good defensively or between the pipes compared to the Calgary Flames. So whether or not the Flames are going Markstrom or Vladar, I think they'll be able to keep the Sabres off the board for the most part, and their offense should be able to keep rolling. The Flames have covered the puck line in 4 of their last 6 games. So even though the payout's not great at -140, I like the spot here. Colorado puck line, Calgary puck line, 2 bets tonight on a Friday night, Frank.
Love it. Let's get to Chris Gear I cede the floor to you for garbage time. And this year, trade has just been another word for reunion.
Yeah, at the beginning of the show, you were reluctant to sing the final countdown, but I'm going to give you a little reunited and it feels so good.
I like it.
So we
Give this man a microphone for karaoke night.
So we had Frank Vetrano being traded, and he was greeted with a tweet from Jacob Trouba, which showed the two of them as fairly young. I'm not sure when that was from, but pretty fun little pic there of 2 young kids. And then the other story out of Calgary was Calle Jarnkrok going to be reunited with both Jacob Markstrom and his cousin Elias Lindholm. And Markstrom there saying that the 3 of them had plans to buy a Swedish division team when they were old and retired, but why not come together now? I think what this demonstrates is that there's a hard part about trades. Like, it's really tough to uproot people and move them from one city, with their families and everything that goes on in their lives, just put them in another city. But the positive side is it's a small league, and guys have all played together in other cities or in junior. Or in Sweden in this case. And, there's always that nice reunion side, which sort of comforts the blow of being traded. So a little bit of a light story to finish the day, but, a lot of these reunions happen every time guys get traded, and it's a bit of a positive spin on what can be a tough day for people getting traded. So thought it fit the theme of the day, and that's your garbage time.
Love it. Yeah, that's why I think the trades from Calgary have worked out so well, or will, I think, is they felt like curated selections. You see Tyler Toffoli rolling into town, previously played for Daryl Sutter, was a teammate of Milan Lucic, who picked him up at the airport, and they played with Sean Monahan at some point. There's all these connections that make a fit like that seamless, and then you add in the family perspective of Calle Jarnkrok being cousins with Lindholm and growing up in the same town of Gävle, Sweden with Jacob Markstrom. It's the hockey world. I always say it's the world's smallest $5 billion industry, maybe not during COVID times, $5 billion, but pretty darn close. And it seems like someone knows someone everywhere you turn, some kind of 20 or 30 year relationship that's gone on. And it's pretty amazing to see in the hockey world, and pretty amazing to see teams using that to their advantage to try and make these fits a little bit more hand in glove, which is such a big part of trade deadline acquisitions. Chris, this has been fun, a jam-packed edition of the Daily Faceoff Show. We've got you covered on Monday, 3.5 hours of commercial-free analysis and breaking news from our whole team of experts, including yourself, Chris, hosted by Tyler Yaremchuk. I'll be there with a creepy insider cam, breaking news when I can jump in. You'll see me working all day long on the phone throughout the show. We're going to have tons of fun, 3.5 hours commercial free, 12 noon Eastern, right through the deadline at 3. We'll go until 3:30. You know where to find us. Follow us on YouTube, subscribe, and you'll get an alert when we go live. We'll also be streaming on Twitter, as well as, of course, dailyfaceoff.com. That is all the time that we have for today's show. Keep it locked on dailyfaceoff.com for all the latest news, insight, and analysis from around the NHL. We've got you covered all weekend with our trade tracker and tons of breaking news and insight. We will talk to you on Monday. It's the final countdown. We've made it to deadline weekend, 75 hours, a little less than that to go until the NHL's trade deadline. Enjoy it, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Thanks for watching the Daily Face-Off Show.
Make sure you hit subscribe on our YouTube channel to never miss an episode.